Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for being part of WorkSafe's webinar, Flexible and Remote Working, Practical Tips for Employers to Keep Their Staff Safe. Hi, my name is Rob Kelly. I'm the Director of Special Services at WorkSafe, and I'll be your host for the webinar today. Now, while our sessions are virtual this year, our aims for Health and Safety Month remain the same, and that's to keep you up to date. And this year's theme is You Learn Something New Every Day. We've structured this particular session, first off, to examine the impacts that COVID-19 has had on remote and flexible working. The panel will start to give us guidance, practical tips and advice on how to support workers who not only have physical risks, but also the mental health issues that come with that. What we'll hear them talk about is ergonomics and human factors, mental health, return to work, but also guidance material that's available to you to help you work your way through that. Now, when we originally planned this session, it was very much about working remotely, but with the conditions changing now, we're starting to see things like hybrid. We'll also talk about that today, about going back to work. So what I'd like to do now is just before we get into the session proper, introduce our speakers. So first up, we have Sarah Helpich, and Sarah is the Senior Psychological Health and Safety Specialist in WorkSafe. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
Next up, we have Sam Harrison, and Sam's the Principal Ergonomist in WorkSafe. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Rob. Hi, everyone.
And next we have Renee Walsh, and Renee is the Program Officer of Psychological Health Programs. Hi, Renee.
Hi, Rob. Hi, everyone.
And last we have Lucas Kowalski, and Lucas is the Manager of WorkSafe Return to Work Programs area. Hello, Lucas.
G'day, Rob.
So, we know that COVID-19 has had an impact on workplaces. We've been used to working in the physical locations, and this has now led to us to do a lot more remote and flexible working. With that, it comes, our resilience has taken a hit. Our coping skills have taken a hit. We can feel overwhelmed. We can feel angry, frustrated, anxious, uncertain, which is to be expected. What we're looking to do now is those feelings can be heightened by what we call work-related reasons, and they're called psychosocial hazards. And what I'm going to do is lead in with the first question with Sarah and ask you, Sarah, is psychosocial hazards seem to have been heightened during the pandemic. Can you talk me through which particular ones may well be more heightened at the moment, and what are the things that employees and employers need to look out for?
Yeah, sure, Rob. So I guess just to start with, what are psychosocial hazards? So they are things in the design and the management of work that cause or can impact an individual's stress levels. Now, if they're existent over a long, protracted period of time, they can cause a psychological injury. So it's really about employers being aware of what they are and when they're active. So just throughout COVID, I guess some of the ones that come to mind are isolated work. So due to remote working conditions, lots of people have been thrust into working from a home environment, and also, I guess, juggling those family responsibilities that have come with that. So extreme pressures with regards to working from home. Also, if we think about some of the industries that have experienced significant, growth throughout this period, if you think about financial services industry, looking after people that are needing to restructure their mortgages or their financial circumstances. So again, heightened job demands. So really long hours, higher client load, and also dealing with customers that might be quite vulnerable. So when customers are vulnerable, they can become either angry and aggressive, or they can be in an emotional crisis. So it's really about that tangible support that those people or those staff members would have had in their working environment from their peers or their manager, that tangible support is no longer available. So that, again, is a risk in itself. So that organisational support, not only from the manager, but the organisation has been missing. Another factor that comes to mind is organisational change. So businesses have been having to pivot and rapidly change throughout this time, and as a result have needed to make significant changes in a quick, short time of frames. So that's really caused a little bit of uncertainty with respect to people that have been working in those environments. So a lot of ambiguity, role ambiguity, and if you think about how that might trickle down into people and the working relationships within those cultures. So all of those factors in combination together are those hazards that have been more or less prominent throughout this period.
Thank you. Renee, I'm going to turn to you now. There's two parts to this kind of question. It'd be easy to say, given last year, we a lot of people went and were working remotely. It'd be very easy to say we have that down pat now, but I really want to talk again, just to refresh the considerations an employer should have for their employee to ensure that their workplace is safe. And at the same time, we're also talking now about hybrid working, where we're now looking at both working from home and starting to return to office. Again, what's the consideration an employer should have?
Thanks, Rob. That's a really great question. It's really important for employers to review job roles and the ways of working to make sure that the task can be safely performed wherever they're working from, so either from home or in the office, or as we transition to this hybrid space where we have some people working from home and some in the office. For example, think about schools, primary and secondary schools, and also Sarah just touched on financial services, where workplaces and roles that were traditionally done in the physical environment have had to shift to a home environment. And those industries have had to really rethink the way that they work and redesign systems and processes so that employees can do their jobs safely from home. Employees working in ways that their job is not designed for are at risk of physical or mental injury. So in terms of mental health, good work design is really key in terms of keeping people safe, be that at home or back in the office or the workplace. And the design of work really needs to consider the type of work, the environment that they're working in, and also the employee's capabilities. And through consultation, employers can improve work design and safety for employees by exploring things like providing employees with appropriate control and flexibility around how they do their work, but also making sure that there's supports in place. So where they're having to make quick or challenging decisions, they've got that support there to go to. It's also important to consider the variety of the tasks, particularly in the home environment. Roles where they are really repetitive and monotonous, that's some work that's really good if you can rotate it or share it amongst teams. If you've got teams, just to share the workload and keep things a little bit interesting for people. It's also really important to make sure that employees are given tasks that are matched to their skills. That sounds really straightforward, but when you've got someone who doesn't have well-matched skills to their role, you've got situations where someone may become overwhelmed because the demands of the role exceed their capability. And then on the flip side, if they're doing a job that is not using all of their skills, they can become quite disengaged. And over time, both of those situations can lead to stress. And I'd also just call out as well the importance of workload. So rostering and planning, making sure people are getting enough rest time. Also discouraging employees from regularly working really long hours, and also encouraging employees to take leave entitlements and utilise flexible working arrangements. And this one's really particularly important for leaders to role model, to really set the tone for people to be able to tap into flexible work. And I guess I just encourage employers, as we're moving back into the workplace and into more of a hybrid working environment, that you're really considering the design of the work in the first place to really protect employees in the environment that they're working in.
Thank you. And I think going back to what Sarah said a little bit earlier on with the question I asked, it's a heightened sense. Some of these factors are a heightened sense. They exist already when they were in the physical workplace or your normal office. Is it fair then to say that what you're doing there is you're adjusting to the circumstance, and as whether it's working remotely or starting to do the hybrid model, it's continually adjusting to look out for those, either the physical or the mental health injury risks that are there. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. It can't be same. You need to really be adjusting to the environment and remaining really flexible and adaptable as we go into this return to work space.
Thank you. And Sam, I'm going to turn to you now. So to what extent does an employer have to ensure that the home environment, the work environment is safe for their employee and doesn't exacerbate or enhance the psychosocial hazards that are present? And again, that's, we've been here for a while now. So in some cases, it's a bit of a refresh for some.
Yeah, it is really important, and yes, we have been here for a while. But it's the first thing, and both Renee and Sarah have mentioned, the importance of maintaining that contact and consultation with your employees about the work that they're doing. So, it is really important to work together with your employees to identify and minimise those psychosocial as well as the physical health and safety risks that might be present in whatever work environment that your employees are in. And the issues are the same for an employer wherever their employees work from. That is, obviously to create a safe, mentally and physically safe workplace so far as is reasonably practicable. And by the same token, employees do have obligations under the legislation as well to ensure that they're taking care of their own health and safety and following those health and safety processes and policies and so forth that are in place by the employer. Things like making sure that if you are at a remote environment, working from home, wherever it might be, that your equipment is safe and in good order. And if it's not, then reporting that through to your employer to make sure that that can be rectified. And it is difficult to, we can't expect people to necessarily alter their home environment so it becomes a perfect office space. They're a personal environment. So it's hard to monitor that, but we need to make sure that that open communication is there. So checking in around people's physical and mental health, around the anxiety, around all sorts of different things that they might have at the moment is really important.
It's, in the last three answers, there's a lot of information there. Where can I go? Or what resources does WorkSafe have to guide us, to guide employers and employees on this? Yeah,
sure. So the WorkSafe website's a great source of support and guidance material, tools and those sorts of things. And we've got some images that will come up on the screen. So in this first slide, this is an example of some of the guidance that we have. So this one particularly is around minimising the spread of COVID-19 in a working from home type environment. But we have lots of other resources around COVID-19 particularly at the moment, which is, very useful for employers and employees. If we go now to the next slide, we've got lots of mental health related guidance, and this is just two examples in relation to prevention and management of work-related stress and also work-related fatigue. But we have lots of other guidance material, and I really encourage employers and employees to have a look at what we've got available. And we've recently developed some quick reference guides in relation to some of this guidance, which 2 or 3 page fact sheets on each of the main mental health related guidance documents. And lastly, if we bring up the final slide, this is just shows you information about the WorkWell toolkit. And if anyone was able to see the first session that we had on today, we had WorkWell talking about all the different information that is available within that WorkWell site and what they've been doing in the space of psychological health and safety. So it's really important. We have lots of other resources. I would also add that we have resources around manual handling, hazardous manual handling, and Office-Wise, for example, is really important information particularly for people when they're working in different environments and looking at those risk assessments that employers need to do.
Thank you. It's interesting because the 2 sessions we had earlier on this morning was the Work Well program, but also building leaders who work well. And one of the themes that I'm hearing is about this connected and communications and support. So Renee, I'm going to put this question to you. Given the portfolio of work you look at, are there any issues we're seeing in relation to communication and connectedness? And why is it so important for people who work remotely to stay connected and stay supported?
Thanks, Rob. I think the remote working environment has really highlighted the need for regular communication and connectedness. It's incredibly important all the time, but certainly in the COVID context, it's really important for leaders to be proactive in this space and carve out time to catch up one-on-one with individuals in their teams. Our diaries are all incredibly jam-packed, but I'd really encourage employers to prioritise those catch-ups, and also particularly as we're heading back into the office. There's been a bit of discussion about some people are going to be really excited to get back into the office and rip the Band-Aid off. They want to be there. Others will be a bit nervous for lots of other reasons. So it's incredibly important to be having those regular conversations so that you can see where people are at and make plans that suit the individual around flexibility. And I think it's also important to start having some conversations both with individuals and in teams about how we can best work together in the combination of remote working and some people in workplaces as well. So how can we best work together and flexibly as teams to get done what we need to get done? I'd also encourage people to create opportunities to come together. So that might still be in the virtual space, just to allow people to come together wherever they are for a coffee, or set up some team group chats or challenges just to keep everybody connected. I know at my workplace at WorkSafe, our team has been talking about in the hybrid setup, whether we have one day a week where we have a team crossover day in the workplace so we can all get connected, but the rest of the work week remains really flexible depending on what people's movements are. The regular communication also really helps to keep on top of and identify and manage risks. So when you're really keeping in contact with employees regularly, you can keep an eye on workloads. You can check in on home office setups and access to technology like Samantha just touched on. And you can make adjustments to job design, which I spoke about earlier, and be making tweaks and be remaining really agile as we are in this kind of fluid space from transitioning from home back into the workplace.
Thank you. And so I'm going to draw you back in. We've heard a lot there. There's been a lot of tips and information and guides that's been mentioned. Is there anything else? Is there any other tips that you have?
Yeah, look, I'll really echo what Renee said as far as the connection piece. So particularly with the managers and their employees. So it's that connection and that rapport that's built over time and that momentum that grows through that rapport, which is where you really get that relationship where you have the employee telling the manager what they need in order to do their job the best to the best of their abilities. But also at the team level, I think just talking to the psychosocial hazards that I mentioned before, at the team level, just creating a dialogue for those hazards. So talking about them and bringing them out into the open and saying, we've been dealing with difficult customers. We have increasing job demands. How can we manage that as a team at the local level? And what are some of the ways that we can get through these challenges together? So bringing everyone on board to solve the problem together, it really creates that sense of control over the situation. And also you'll find that there's a lot of innovative ways to deal with some work-related pressures at that team level. And again, just to echo Renee's point, regular one-on-one catch-ups with the manager. Now, if that's not always possible, if there is, a manager managing more than 10 staff, it might be worthwhile to outsource that to different functions of the business, such as HR or even an external EAP provider. But that regular consistency, particularly as we move through another change back to a hybrid working model, is really important to keep that consistency and continuity up.
Thank you. Lucas, I'm going to draw you in now. Thanks for waiting so patiently there. Remote workers aren't the only workers in the business world today. What can employers do to improve the outcome of workers who are returning to work during this time? Absolutely.
So I think fundamentals of return to work planning that would happen before COVID will still apply during the current environment. And with the easing of restrictions over the next couple of weeks, there will be the opportunity for a lot of injured workers, for example, who have sustained a workplace injury to start thinking about returning to the workplace. Something that's been mentioned by everyone so far is that communication piece, and it's very much more so important where someone has been injured, thinking about someone with a physical injury that may have been able to at least visit the workplace to check in with their colleagues. That may have not happened during a period of lockdown. So keeping them involved, even with weekly updates, things that are happening at the workplace, are really, really important. Return to work planning is key, and that comms exchange between the injured worker and the employer is very, very, very much important. I think the employer, but also the injured worker, both need to be patient, but also have some realistic expectations about what can and will be done when returning to work starts to happen. I think the long-term approach is really important, where an employer may have planned for a return to work pre-COVID, that will look a bit different perhaps with density requirements and even just the future operating model of that employer. So adjusting a return to work plan or proposal to reflect that is very, very important, so that where there are no kind of there's no confusion around what's expected of the injured worker for their initial return to work, but also the few months after that. During lockdowns, I think what we've identified in the physical injury space is the prevalence of secondary mental injury. Thinking about someone with a physical injury that is isolated, perhaps at home, isn't able to function with their family, their children, for example, and their mental health may also decline. So employers listening out for any keywords around anxiety, depression, feeling down and not engaging in social activities with their families, and perhaps tabling that conversation with their employee injured worker to ensure that they are accessing support, for example, a GP mental health care plan, or even just some support via some psychological services. I guess ergonomics is also important. We think about ergonomics in the physical sense, but thinking about returning to work in a corporate environment, for example, where we've all worked in isolation at home, and then we may be in an office space with 10, 20, 50 others talking amongst ourselves, and the volume will be a little bit different. So assessing the ergonomics in that space, in the psychological space and psychological sense, to ensure that we're all, again, patient and respectful of one another, very, very important for return to work.
Yeah, it's interesting because the very first webinar this year was Joanne and Dan's story, which is about how they return to work. And if you haven't had the opportunity to see it, I recommend you would, because what it does do is talk about that sense of support and connected and communication, but also the hidden impacts and potentially the secondary injury, as you've mentioned there. So Sarah, I'm going to throw this question to you in that same kind of context. I'm communicating with my staff member, we're keeping connected, but I can see something's not right. What do I do, or how do I connect when I'm starting to see they're struggling or could be struggling with mental health in the workplace? As a leader, what can I do?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. And I think what we probably as leaders need to be aware of right now is that we're going to see much more of that right now as we, again, transition into that hybrid model. So a common term that has been, I guess, termed recently is languishing. So it's, I guess, when we think about the mental health continuum, you've got, health and illness at polar ends, and in the middle, you've got this kind of languishing. So you're not quite in that green zone where you're mentally healthy and well, but you're not quite mentally ill either. So you're just not your best optimal self. So I think that first and foremost, if you've got that rapport with your staff, wonderful, great place to start, because when you're actually reaching out, you're not sort of creating, a conversation from scratch. You've actually got some rapport, and you might already have some information available to you about some of the stressors that are active for that individual. But I think what I encourage more often than not is proactivity. So reaching out when you do see those early signs. So I talk about a model called the look, listen and link model. So we're, as managers, looking for those changes in behaviour, looking for changes in mood, and even looking for salient points that people say, I'm feeling fatigued. I'm just unmotivated. Okay, so these are signs that people are not doing as well as what they could be. They might be languishing. Their performance might change. They might present differently in a meeting. They might be more withdrawn. They might be more heightened and agitated. Okay, so these are all changes that managers need to reach out and respond to. So that proactivity. And when you are reaching out, it's just, again, having that open conversation of rapport with your employee around how's everything going? Is there anything that I can support within the workplace? And outside of the workplace, what sort of support are you getting? So really linking them in to those supports. So in the workplace, you might leverage off some of the policies, such as flexible work policies. You might direct them to their EAP provider for support. but also making sure that you're touching base with that individual again as to how they're doing and how those supports have been put into place. So if you are developing a little bit of a plan for the individual around flexibility, either that hybrid or changing the work design for that person at an individual level, it's checking back in and making sure that that's working for them and that their, presentation is improving over time.
Thank you. Lucas, I'm actually going to come back around. I want to talk about return to work a bit more. How can we support workers who have been off during COVID but are planning to come back to work or return to work if that's doing it remotely?
So again, fundamentals still apply. It's just that the location of return to work will be a little bit different. Setting those expectations and structures is very, very important. So thinking about a colleague who may be or a staff member returning to work post-injury but working from home, we take for granted the ability to turn around to a colleague and ask a question when we're sitting together. So being able to set up some structure for the first day and even the last day of the week to kind of check in with that employee, but ensuring that they have someone to engage with and that they're not working in isolation when they do return. As a scheme, there are a number of support services for employers. So really encourage employers to consider them. And one of them is, for example, a mobile case manager intervention through one of our agents. The mobile case managers can arrange some time with the injured worker, the employer, and even the treating health practitioner to sit down and talk about that return to work and collaborate on that return to work plan. And we've heard a lot about collaboration today and communication as well. There may be some circumstances where some additional support is required, and we have a panel of 24 occupational rehab providers. Allied Health, they can provide some tailored guidance around return to work. They have been able to conduct workplace assessments remotely, so via Zoom, for example. We've had 2 years to almost fine-tune how we do that. So that way, the employer does have a bit more confidence that the workplace at home is safe, but also the injured worker has experienced that level of support, that they're not just expected to turn up, that someone's actually considered what they'll be doing, for the first day and the first week, for example. Longer term, I think employers should consider what that individual may do and how they fit into their business. It may mean that their role will change, perhaps off the back of COVID impacting business. And the scheme can fund retraining for an individual that's been injured as well. So upskilling within the same business, there could be another role that the injured worker may be suitable for, and the scheme can offer some retraining support to bring that individual up to be suitable for that role. It also may be a role outside of the business which can be supported. So I think overall it needs to be that kind of balancing of the physical and mental well-being, and staying connected, having some structure, and also some future planning will definitely help achieve an outcome that's positive for the injured worker, but also for the employer and the business as well.
Thanks, Lucas. And thank you to the panel, because we've actually reached the end of that section. We now want to go to questions on that one, but thank you very, very much. We did say we wanted to share practical tips and guidance, and I think we've done that. And as always, you can get more information from our website, but we're going to get into the questions now. So first one up is just over here, and we are getting a number through, and they're getting well liked. So is there written guidance around what an employer needs to do to assess home working safely? For example, does electrical testing and tagging need to occur in the home? I'm going to throw that to you, Sam.
Sure, thanks. So the risk assessments and the equipment that is provided or is in the home, falls under the regular category of what would be required from a workplace perspective in regards to providing safe equipment. From a test and tag perspective, for that particular issue, it could fall under your regular employer program from a test and tag perspective if it's employer equipment. It can be difficult because it is in the home environment. We mentioned earlier in regards to changing a physical home environment or in a remote environment is very difficult for an employer to do because it's a personal workspace. But the employer may implement risk assessments in the home. They might do things such as providing online, certainly in COVID, situations where we're locked down, providing those online risk assessments or workstation setups and those sorts of things that might actually assist from that perspective. So there are different things from a guidance perspective. It is pretty much, it fits within the guidance that we've already got from that perspective. I would be looking and pointing towards the Office-wise guidance for that office type setup at home.
Thank you. The next question up is, how best should employers consult with health and safety representatives and workers in a remote and flexible working environment? There are lots of employers currently not doing this very well. I'm thinking either Renee or Sam on that one.
Can have a go at that first, Sam, and you can jump in after.
Sure.
I think it's really important. We've spoken a lot about communication and connection. Leaders in the workplace need to be really proactive in this space, and they need to be setting up forums for people to be able to consult with their HSRs and also with others across the business. It's so important that they have an opportunity to share concerns and have those recognised, and also gain knowledge as well. There's so much changing at the moment in this COVID environment. Things are changing all the time. So those regular forums, be it town hall meetings or toolbox talks, they need to be used as forums to consult with employees.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that as well. And that is offering the opportunity or providing the opportunity for your HSRs to catch up with their designated work groups as well. That's really a key aspect of what an HSR does as part of their role as an HSR. So providing that time for them to do that, whether it's through Teams meetings or online meetings or whatever it might be. And now that we're going into this hybrid environment, providing that opportunity for HSRs to catch up with their DWGs in person where that's possible, but also offering that hybrid model of potentially doing a crossover thing, similar to what Renee mentioned earlier with that crossover of having some people in the office or in the workplace, as well as having that online contact. Really important to keep that communication going.
Thank you. I think it's also a good opportunity to mention the fact that WorkSafe really does see the importance of health and safety representatives. A lot of guidance on our websites, but there's also WorkSafe has continued to support HSRs through our health and safety representative support officers. So that's another opportunity to contact us if you are in the particular workplace you mentioned there where employers currently not doing this very well. I'll take that as a statement from yourself, but please reach out if you need to. Next question. It's a bit of a long one. I worked in a team of 2. I expressed to my manager feeling isolated, excluded, and a request for more opportunities to connect with staff remotely as a new staff member. She declined and focused on establishing herself as a new manager. How do you train managers to understand psychosocial risks? Sarah, I'm going to put that one to you.
Yeah, I guess first and foremost, that's unfortunate for a new starter to not have that support. And yes, remote and isolated work, along with the support that you need to start a new job. I mean, they're psychosocial hazards that definitely need to be taken care of. So I guess at an organisational level, best practice is mental health, essentials training. So really helping managers, but also employees at all levels, understanding what psychosocial hazards are and also how they manifest in individuals. So what are some of the signs to look out for? And then helping individuals to get that support if they're not getting it from their direct manager. So whether they're reaching out to a colleague or reaching out to their EAP provider for that help and that support that they need. So I guess just to reinforce and reiterate, organisations to get that base level training across the whole of business. And particularly for managers, it's really that people leader training, because it is that next level that we're asking people leaders to go to. And if they are new to that managerial role, it's really upskilling them with the ability not only to understand what are the psychosocial hazards active in that environment, but how do we respond to our people when they are active and that they are showing signs that they're in distress or not coping. So giving the managers essentially the tools to be able to respond. So that next level of mental health essentials training or mental health first aid for people leaders.
Thank you. Next one is, what obligations does the employer have to set the employee up to work from home? Thinking of staff who have been told required to work from their homes and are now working at the kitchen table bent over a laptop, which is not ergonomically set up. Sam, I'm going to give that one to you.
Yeah, sure. So we talked about the obligations of an employer being the same no matter where your workers are working. So that obligation is to provide a workplace that is safe as is reasonably practicable, both from a physical and a mental health perspective as well. So the obligations are no different if your employees are working from home. There may be times where it's employees aren't in a great position, and it's then working with your employees to have a look at what other options might be available to them. Can they temporarily come into an office to be able to work from there instead of working from home? Is there more equipment that an employer needs to provide as far as ensuring that the setup is from a physical ergonomic perspective is actually set up appropriately for the worker to continue their work at home.
Thank you. I'm going to continue with you, Sam, on this, but potentially with Renee as well. And it's actually a good question. The WorkSafe Office-wide guide is out of date. Are there plans to review and update the very valuable material? Would you consider developing a guide for home office environments? Could you provide more guidance on the use of headsets and earpods in relation to exposure of noise? So there's 3 different things in there.
Yep. So I can advise that we are looking at. If we realise that Office-wise is very out of date. It was, I think, 2006 was the last edition, or 2009. Anyway, a long time ago. So we are currently reviewing Office-wise at the moment. It needs to go through a process of external consultation as part of that review, and we are looking at what we can include. If it's different to what we've got in there now, we need to go through that process of looking at the information that needs to be included, and as well if there's any information that needs to be excluded. So that would include things like including passages on working from home, including things like the use of headsets and earphones and those sorts of things, whether that is potentially creating a risk to health and safety from a noise perspective as well. So we have specialists within our organisation that can actually provide that technical input into those guidance materials. So anything like that that's actually brought to our attention, we actually take that as on board as part of the review and work out whether we can actually fit that within the guidance.
So just teasing out, the last part of the question there was about guidance on use of headsets and earpods. I think that could be a separate question in itself in relation to exposure of noise. If I'm at home, I'm using earpods and they're loud and I have concern for my hearing, what can I do?
You could turn the sound down. That's probably the first thing that I would suggest. The other thing is, if the opportunity could be there to not use the earpods and earphones. Now, often we're using earphones and earpods because we're trying to block out other noise that's around us. So can we actually move into an area that's more quiet so that we don't actually need to use things that are directly on our head or in our ears? So things like that would need to be taken into consideration, as well as the type of earphones and earbuds that are being used that actually might make a difference to the amount of noise that's going into the ears. Because the ears, it's a physical hazard, noise, oddly enough. It actually changes the direction of the hairs in the ears. So that's when we're looking at damage to hearing and those sorts of things, it's the damage with the inside the ear. So we need to look at, what volume are you listening at? Why do you need to listen at that volume? And what other things can we do to actually mitigate that potential risk?
Is it also fair to say that the employer themselves have a duty here, that if I have concern for noise, how would I raise that, or how can I raise that?
I would be raising it through an incident reporting process that the employer may have on site or within their organisation. As a first and foremost, that would be my first point of call, is to do that, raising that with a health and safety rep, for example, or through the health and safety department at your organisation. That would be my first point of call. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, next one up is, does WorkSafe still advise against hot desking? Our workplace is consulting with head office staff about potential hybrid working post-COVID, and with potentially less staff in the office, we may not be able to afford to keep the same size office, which may result in hot desking. I think that there could be a mix between Lucas and Sam there.
Yeah, I'll start, and Lucas, you can probably come in from a different perspective. So from a hot desking perspective, I'd be looking at the other controls that are in place. So are there appropriate cleaning measures in place between use of the desks and those sorts of things? Are people able to bring their own devices in to sit at the desks? But, those sorts of things, that there's different controls that need to be put in place. It's not just about sitting at the desk and hoping that the person before you, has left it clean. It's actually what processes do you have in place to make sure that desks are actually cleaned and the equipment's actually cleaned between users.
Lucas, anything to add?
I think as part of return to work, that may have a bit of an impact on what someone can do and for how long. Thinking about someone that requires a certain setup in an office environment, for example, post-injury, it may be a bit difficult for them to share a desk with another colleague the next day because the desk needs to remain for that individual. So I think it would just be something that needs to be taken into account as part of the return to work planning process, so that, if a Monday, Wednesday, Friday is organised, the desk is set up those days for that individual. And that's something that the employer could consider to discuss with the OC rehab provider as well, to help support that workstation setup.
Thank you. Sarah, I think this one may be yours. Despite frequent video calls and checking in, we had one employee resign citing feeling too isolated. How do we do more when employees are not disclosing their feelings despite checking in regularly?
Yeah, I guess it's a real tricky one. I guess I'll come back to what I've probably already reiterated. It's probably the relationship and rapport that's built with the manager and the individual, where you are going to have those more nuanced conversations around what's going on and how that's impacting you at an individual level. It's really that trust where you're going to get more of the buy-in with respect to what's going on and how you can support. But where an individual is not forthcoming, it's really around reminding each individual employee that they do also have an obligation to their own health and safety at work. So if they're not coping, not only is their manager hopefully being proactive and reaching out to them, but it's also their responsibility to take control or take care of what they need to do to best perform their role. So if it is that isolated work is not working for them, it's about them being forthcoming to their manager around what it is that they need to perform their duties to the best of their possible abilities. So that might be a hybrid working model. And in some instances, there has been those allocations made in the work setting to support that individual or individuals that do need those adjustments made. So reasonable adjustment policies and procedures are those ones that would become active and support that individual employee. But yeah, I guess just to reiterate, it's that two-way, that combination between the manager and the employee also being forthcoming with regards to their own health and safety as well.
Thank you. And this will probably be our last question. And it's actually directed towards you, Sam, because you got a direct mention to Samantha. What processes should be put in place for transitioning between working from home and returning to the workplace?
Yeah, so I'd be looking at, and it's similar to the information that Renee talked about earlier, in looking at that design of the work that you're doing. So as we transition back into the workplace, it is going to raise a lot of different issues. So from a physical and mental health perspective, we're now in a situation where we're probably going to be sitting in this hybrid workspace between the two spaces for a little while. But it's really important from that system design perspective and going, well, what is the work that we're doing? How has the work changed? And what does that mean for actually working back at the workplace? Do we actually need to change our processes and the ways that we're doing things to actually make it easier for employees to actually transition back into the workplace as well? So need to take all aspects of it into consideration, not just the physical, it's the mental health side of it as well.
Thank you. I am mindful of time. So what I'd like to do now is just one brief message you have each to the audience today. So I'll start with you, Sarah.
Yeah, Rob, thank you. Look, it's been great to be part of this discussion. I think my salient points are proactive engagement, the two-way proactive engagement. So employees that are going back to work and they need reasonable adjustments or they need some changes to their working balance, it's really about communicating that openly with your manager and appreciating that you will receive the support. Again, from a manager, if you don't have the skills and you don't feel confident with your ability to manage psychological risk in the workplace, making sure that you increase your capability there and getting that support that you need from your organisation to do that for your people, because it's really that proactive engagement that's going to support our people through this next stage.
Thank you. Lucas?
Very much down the path of the communication and collaboration, but I think also the key for me is that it's genuine, creating that safe space so that when we call out someone that perhaps hasn't spoken up, understanding why that's happened. But I think genuine communication, open, but also pretty transparent as well.
Thank you. Renee?
Again, echoing Sarah and Lucas around communication, particularly as we start to talk about what returning to the workplace looks like for those that have been working from home. Start having those conversations now, have those individual and team level conversations, and start talking about what the new hybrid way of working is going to look like for your team and for your colleagues.
And finally, Sam, to round it out.
Yeah, so what I'd sort of like to reiterate is that, employers have an obligation to support the mental and physical health of their staff, no matter where they're working from. So it's really important to, as everyone has said, communication is key from this perspective, looking at your systems of work and determining whether is that actually the right way for us to work as we're coming back into a hybrid model or back to the workplace model.
Thank you. Thank you all for really sharing those insights. And we did talk about sharing practical tips, and there's a lot of information in there. There's heaps of guidance. As I know, there's a lot of guidance available online as well. So thank you all for that. I think it's important to recognize WorkSafe is providing support to workers during these tough times. And it makes it so much more important, particularly now, to get the principles about working remotely in place and embedded. One of the things in summary, what I'm hearing is support and communication are key, even from our leaders, and self-care as well. So I'd like to end on that one. Thank you all for that. Now, if there's anything you've heard today that has caused you concern or you need to speak to WorkSafe urgently, please contact us through our advisor emergency line. Again, on behalf of the panel today, myself and WorkSafe, thank you for joining us today.